Good. Mr. Kutsia,
Luciano,
thank you so much for your time.
thank you very much.
It's always a bit of a trek to travel from Cape Town to Johannesburg, Gauteng, but we really appreciate your input and your knowledge on the field that, the topics that we're going to be discussing today is obviously highly appreciated
Thank you.
and highly regarded. So thank you very much for allocating time and sharing
Welcome.
your
I hope I can help.
Sure, you can. Albert, I think let's kick off. The purpose of the discussion today, I thought, let's have a discussion about what keeps clients awake at night. I think it's becoming all more and more relevant in my discussions with clients. There are these elements, taking mind space, and clients are unsure. One of the topics specifically is, being asset rich and cash poor. Now, we're familiar with the fact that, and when I consult with clients, I come across, asset bases that are significant, substantial amounts of wealth that's been created over time. The challenge, however, is clients don't at all times bring into consideration the liquidity requirements, in terms of the winding up of the estate process. How do we go about structuring estates in such a way that the capital ultimately, there's sufficient liquidity, obviously, to fund these costs that we're unaware of, costs, taxes, and the like. But how do we ensure that the clients actually allocate the funds to the persons or beneficiaries they initially envisaged for it to allocate?
Luciano, yeah, that's a good question. It's also not an easy question, easy answer. I think at my time at 91, we created a unit which were called the Masterclass unit. Remember, at our time, in my time, my skill, my IP, is I go across the country working with top-tier independent advisors and wealth managers. They then, on their self or indirectly, work with top-tier end clients, high-net-worth clients or clients. And through that, we gathered information, and then we created a very well-known, documented slide, the top 10 things that keep you awake at night. Now, number one is liquidity at death. Now, liquidity at death can be defined with two different things. So the one sometimes when we speak about is when I have all the money and I passed away, my will kicks in, then there's a period of time, the master, the executor appointed. It can take more than a year, it can take 2-3 years for that estate to be sort of transferred across from you to my spouse. So the one definition of liquidity on death is how long does my spouse have to wait to get his or her hands onto the funds to survive. Now, yes, sometimes spouses sort of go quickly to the bank account, right or wrong, and so, okay, fine, I'm the 100% beneficiary anyway, the executor will do the calculation behind the scene, I can survive. But I sometimes have cases where when I pass away, I only use facial recognition on my phone. Now suddenly nobody can access my accounts. So that is liquidity on death. But when you read articles also, there's also liquidity on death, meaning the estates, exactly what you say, is asset rich but cash poor. What does that mean? So on passing, especially on the death of the last dying spouse, the taxes that needs to pay is estate duty, capital gains tax. The estate during the process needs to register as a taxpayer, you need to pay income tax as the estate, but also very important, you need to pay executor's fee. Now, yes, you can have life cover to protect that. Yes, you can have surplus funds to protect that. But I think whatever you do as the estate, whatever you do as the patriarch and matriarch at the moment, whatever you do as the children sitting around the table with the parents, you need to do a estate duty calculation to say, for example, what if something happened to this family or the patriarch today, what is that bill? Remember, everything can roll from mother to father, father to mother. But the big question is the last dying spouse. So when we get scenarios in, I'm a strong believer in that, is very often you speak to the father, and the father says, don't worry, when I die, my wife gets everything. That's the wrong comment. When you deal with a family, husband and wife, treat every single client as a single client, as a not married client. Because if you then do your financial planning as if that person is single and maybe I die and I'm actually married, those taxes roll very smoothly over to my spouse. But when she then passed away, you can do away with a lot of those things I've just mentioned. For example, if you've treated that individual, even though he was married, as a single person. because then you've red alert, try to avoid those things.
Yeah, so I find that quite often, where wills are drafted in such a way that I bequeath my full estate to my spouse. Obviously, you are now referring to Section 4Q of the Estate Duty Act, which allows that
Rolls.
deduction. So there is rollover, and the same goes for the capital gains tax, which literally just kicks the tin down the road.
Correct.
So I couldn't agree with you more. So we share that sentiment, and we try to advise clients accordingly. To make sure that you bring that to the front as an individual estate planner rather than a couple.
Yeah, interesting what we also see. So I would have thought maybe in the older days, at a certain age, you've worked, you gathered money, you just now sit, enjoy it, and then pass away. But what we see in our scenario experience is you're never too old to restructure. Yeah. So if I, for example, have loan accounts, that loan account is part of my estate. Should I do something with it now? If I, for example, have certain assets, for example, when I die as a last dying spouse, it's part of my estate. But interesting, when you take some of the money and you do over contribution to retirement funds, potentially that can be out of your estate. If you take stuff which is exposed to your will currently, and you maybe redeem that, you pay capital gain, watch out, and then from there on you maybe invest in a policy, a South African endowment sinking fund, where the policy have beneficiary nomination. Remember that roll from mother to me is not a capital gain event, assuming I keep the policy. So suddenly I've saved capital gains tax. Or maybe if it's large sums, I don't want to inherit that money as a child, because that's in my estate again. Maybe I tell my mother, invest it, redeem from your problematic scenario at the moment, invest it in a policy. When you die, bequeath it to a South African trust.
Yeah.
If the trust have natural beneficiaries, the trust can keep the policy. Now suddenly that money is out of my estate. And that roll from mother to South African estate is not a capital gain event. Yes, it's estate dutiable, but you would have paid estate duty anyway. Yeah. And you speed up that transfer across, for example.
So what you're saying then is that we are eliminating one, which is probably the most problematic, the exposure to the master's office being appointed as executive.
Speed up the transfer.
Speed
up the transfer.
The process time. I mean, we've had cases where this takes 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, speed up the transfer.
So this now happens within 5 working days.
Yeah.
In many cases.
Yeah.
It's
finished.
And then also the policy or the structure that you're referring to is could then be regarded as a proceeds beneficiary for proceeds rather than liquidating existing quality investments in open architecture discretionary investments, reducing those market values and then transferring the cash amounts and reinvesting it, because what you're now saying is that you transfer the actual asset value for proceeds to the trust.
Yeah, interesting. Yes and no. When you talk policies, policies can be an endowment or a sinking fund.
Correct.
Now, sinking fund doesn't have the concept of beneficiary for ownership and beneficiary for proceeds, when endowment has. Yeah. Now, I think for your audience members, is policies as definitely have moved on from the old days where it is some policy, you have no idea where you invest, it's expensive, you don't know what you're going to get out. So in South Africa, and my audience members know, I'm very pro policies because of the beneficiary nomination, because of massive amount of taxes that can roll, both in South Africa. Offshore, for example, it can be a CITES tax blocker, but big red light. There are so many interpretations for policies or different product providers. So if you say, I like a policy, you need to understand fully how that policy actually gets sort of like almost from the product house interpreted to be able to administer accordingly, because they're all different.
And I think that's exactly what we do here at Efficient. We try to analyze from an independent perspective, what is best of breed for our clients that suits their individual needs and objectives.
Correct.
Not just create wealth in the asset allocation, but also to create net wealth from a net product perspective as well.
Correct.
I think that's imperative.
What we find currently is in the old days when a client saw an advisor, and I'm sort of generalize here, is literally the first thing they focus on is which instrument, which fund, which share to invest in. Now, I think because of Masterclass and because of industry of changes, I would say the first 1, 2, 3 meetings now all about structure.
Absolutely.
So the discussion about risk profile, the discussion about which share to invest, which fund to invest, is you need to have. Sort of where to income come from. But before you get to that, and interesting, Luciano, what I find, the moment you focus on structure, the advisor or sort of even us are forced to ask more questions Are you married? Are you a South African tax resident? Are you planning to break tax residency? Where are your children? All those type of questions. Now, because of structure being so front of mind, you cannot move a client into an idea or a product or a solution if you don't know all those questions and answers. Absolutely. In the old days, that I assume those questions, beneficiary nominations is a known fact. I'm very pro beneficiary nominations. We have a slide pack of 40 slides about beneficiary nominations. If you think of a living annuity, I can think of 12 different variations of beneficiary nominations related to living annuities. The old days, you never had that. Literally, I have a living annuity. I worked my whole life at 91. After many years, I retire from my pension fund, go to a living annuity. Who's your beneficiary? My spouse. Life goes on. A lot has moved on since then.
Yeah, because the depth is never created.
Yeah.
Also, and then I'll move on. What I come across quite often is clients with large discretionary investments. Now, I respect the fact that, in majority of these cases, these clients are dependent on an income drawdown from the discretionary component of their portfolio, which you unfortunately cannot structure otherwise. We get that. But when those drawdown comes to a more palatable number, we try and reallocate the portion that falls outside the ambit of that drawdown percentage to a structure or a policy of sorts, to your previous point, and that allows that amount of the wealth to at least be transferred by means of the point that you made earlier. So thank you for highlighting that once again. Albert, I think the next question there is, your idle cash is quietly costing you. So the point I'm trying to make here is that I think it's that balance between having sufficient liquidity within your estate, go through a full liquidity analysis through using a competent
Which is important,
team.
yeah.
Quantify that first, but don't hold too much cash. And I think what the mistake a lot of clients make is they think that they need a certain amount of cash readily available. And I think that's also an implication. So, the lazy cash just sitting there, what is the most tax efficient approach that one should consider, in that regard?
We don't get into the discussion with the client, because obviously the client is you, the advisor. So we don't get involved so much. The client, you said so much cash, you need to get X, Y, and Z out because of your scenario stuff. That I leave to the advisor. But when we look at structure, when I sit on cash, especially if I'm a high taxpayer, I would pay 45% on that interest. There's no capital gains tax on the money in the bank account, but at the end of the year, provisional tax, end of the tax, clients get surprised to see how much tax they pay. Yeah. Then an idea to say, leave in the account that you need to spend. For example, again, there I go to the policy, because especially for individual, when an individual invests in a policy as per the Long-Term Insurance Act, the 500 approach, the individual policyholder fund, it automatically tax that interest at 30%. So you have the chance to drop it from 45 to 30. So that's the one. Secondly, wherever the policy is 91, for example, the platform provider calculate, deduct, and pay it over to SARS. So you don't get an IT3B every year. But again, here I go. When you sit in a bank account and something happened to you, you're stuck with your will. How long the executor, the master, how long to transfer across. So unless I give some of the cash to my spouse today, to say that, and that cash must be, in my view, at least 12 months of cash to pay expenses. To say, if something happened to me, there you are. That money can move from a bank account to money market. I'm not increasing the risk. From the money market idea into a policy, from policy beneficiary nominations, which is immediate touch with liquid on death, which a bank account is not. Now, I presented, and I like this story, I presented to a group of FISAF, Fiduciary Institute of South Africa, in November last year. And I think somebody was sitting there because there's a client, a husband and wife, in Knysna George area, and the executor, which I think that person was in the audience, highlighted to the clients, they sat with a lot of money in an offshore bank account. The offshore bank account is the same. Offshore bank account is more cumbersome because in that jurisdiction you have probate. Yeah. Now, probate means on my passing, in that jurisdiction, the grant of probate needs to be issued first before it can actually come to South Africa. So the lead came from the attendee to the executive, to the client to tell the advisor to speak to 91, to say, you can actually take the money out of the bank account into a money market. From the money market, then you can structure it, and from the structure you can have beneficiary nominations, so you don't increase your risk. And remember, offshore, Luciano, has thing which South African law tend to acknowledge, which is rolled up fund accumulation class. That means the interest you pay offshore rolls into the class, meaning there's no income tax. But in a bank account, if there is interest, you pay marginal rate on that.
And you pay that in South Africa, in South African rands, irrespective of the
So there's
currency.
another layer, for example. So I'm not increasing that. I leave to the advisor to say if you need to have X1 cash, you need to go. That I leave, but you can definitely overflow cash. Now remember, a trust, hugely beneficial. A trust with natural beneficiaries. When a trust invests in a policy, the policy is also the individual policyholder fund. And how does the individual policyholder fund get taxed? It's 30%. Now, a trust with cash can go in there, for example, and then the income tax is 30% versus the trust is 45%. Now, some trusts say, you know what, when there's gain, I distribute it to the beneficiary.
The conduit principle.
I frown on that, because what you're doing, you're bleeding the trust to, in a way, excuse my English, dodge the tax. And now you're actually bleeding the trust and make the beneficiaries' tax rate higher just to keep the tax low. Where in the trust, there are other alternatives and options to do. But watch out for that trust. That trust must have natural beneficiaries. When the trust goes to the policy, my view, Luciano, take it from where it comes, not advice, there you need to look at a sinking fund, not an endowment. Because the trust going into an endowment with life assured, watch out, that life assured can be troublesome and problematic when it's owned. Because remember, the endowment pays out on the death of the last life assured, but that value can be a deemed asset in the life assured estate, even though the asset is owned by the South African Trust.
And that's only the case in an endowment scenario.
So there I would not go endowments. I would definitely, my view, refer to a sinking fund rather.
Accumulated wealth, structured correctly, how do we transfer intergenerations? I mean, that's becoming a very hot topic. More and more of our clients, of their kids, have immigrated, working abroad. How do we transfer intergenerational wealth, not just locally, but also offshore, to ensure that, the least way of resistance from a friction perspective, the least way of cost, taxes, etc. How do we get these assets abroad, especially when there's more complex entities involved, such as, to your point, trusts, South African and maybe offshore as well?
Yeah, that's a full day discussion, that one. When we get scenarios from advisors across the country, the first question I always ask the client, is the client South African tax resident? Yes, thank goodness, you tick. Is the client planning to break tax resident in the near future? So no, thank goodness, tick. And the third one, where's the children? It's because the children, what we find definitely, in the old days, father had investments, father died, touch wood. As say, for example, there's no mother or father, mother, family, the parents, and from there you take the money, you divide it equal shares, and their children gets it. But you can still do that. But what we find now more and more is the foreign child gets that or inherit that, and the local child, touch wood, gets that. To give an example, one of our big pillars of investment space is retirement funds. Now, when the father dies on a living annuity, now assume there's no mother, and maybe I am a tax resident in a different country, most likely on father's death, I would say give me the cash 91. That money gets paid to me, net of 36% tax. Now, if I had a sister, and the sister rather say, I'll continue with the living annuity, it will be tax neutral. The living annuity will pay the sister an income. In the living annuity, there's no tax, and that living annuity is out of my sister's estate and her family and offspring for life, touch wood, as per current law. Now, can you see how powerful the living annuity is? But now me being a beneficiary of a living annuity, being a foreign child, I've now ruined all of that. So to answer your question, sure, there's lots going on in my mind. The first thing is, and I'm a big believer, and so the phrase that's becoming quite known, but I use it because I like it, is you need to invite the mother. I've got a very soft spot for the mother, assuming the father is the patriarch in the financial affairs. Then very often we speak about intergeneration succession. How do I transfer my wealth to the children? Don't forget the spouse, because touch wood, normally it will go from me to the spouse to the children, and the spouse, touch wood, as per research, are going to outlive me most of the time. If that spouse is not educated, a lot can happen. A lot of damage can happen there. So that's the one thing. If you think about, in my mind, about intergeneration success. So I think there's a whole market to go to the spouse, husband or wife. I'm not saying it's always the wife. To say, now, how do we educate that person? Now, the one thing to educate that person is very important. That person today must have a seat at the table to actually expose, for example, what goes on. So that's the one thing. The second thing is the children needs to come to the table. Somebody asked me the question the other day, when your father die, do you know what you're going to inherit because he discussed the will with you? Or must it be a surprise? Especially if there's 4 children, everybody's different. If somebody is foreign, somebody's not good with money, somebody has a history of some addiction problems, some has second marriages, some is married potentially with a very powerful, overpowering spouse. All of those things needs to be taken into account. So that is important to take note. Family pricing, family offers, Luciano. If I am a wealthy father, encourage me to do 150,000 donation tax-free every year. That money must go to my children. My children must invest into like a tax-free saving investment, a retirement annuity. Let them come to a platform, a new family price, for example. And my last one, thinking aloud, is get products that when I'm the last dying spouse and the investment roll to you, my son, there's potential that capital gain can roll. So there's potential that there's no executor fee. So then suddenly the child must know what they get. Or the product must be the driver to the father to say, you know what, if you pull your son, you trust your children in, that, for example, can be beneficial. And then maybe we can discuss later, but then there's foreign children. How do you structure investments for foreign children?
Yeah, as you say, I think that on its own is a full discussion.
South African trust distributing to foreign children, that's another minefield that you need to look out for.
Which becomes an absolute minefield. I think that's lightly put. Yeah. So the barriers that one has to consider there is significant. Yeah. I think a seat at the table also creates, and we find that from a family office approach, when I consult with clients, not just the individual but the family. I find that a seat at the table allows such a person, the individual spouse, children, etc., not just to understand, but also to air their opinion. And that, in my view, creates accountability. As soon as everyone's on board on the same page with what the vision is, then it changes behavior to a certain extent.
There's a whole market for that, Luciano. In this week, I've been approached twice by a family on its own to say, can we allocate 3 days? Not once, we're going to say which share to buy and which unit trust to buy, not once. Yeah. It's a large family with different family groupings. Dynamics. To say, if we're going to do 3 days, to say, let's work through the 3 days and only talk about the intergeneration succession. Then we're going to sort of have break-off session to say, as per family session, to say, this is what we got. For example, where does it work, where does it not work? Another approach is to say, okay, fine, go a whole day. What's very topical for our network families is actually booking a whole day, having like 11 chapters of the day, breaking it into family constitution to say, actually, what is this wealth about? And it's not only sort of like, so there's a whole, there's already been in existence for a long time, but I think because what we do is we're starting to get exposure and invitations to that as well. One thing I didn't mention, Luciano, which is also important, a lot of children have left the country, but they've never ceased South African tax residency. So if you look at product, again, sort of like when you deal with that child and the child is overseas, my question is, which country have the taxing right? The country you live in, that country plus South Africa, where does the estate duty apply? Because remember, South Africa have a lot of DTAs with income tax. But South Africa only have double taxation agreements for estate duty of 2 major countries, which is the US and the UK, no other country. Now, apart from the father and mother, structure investment on behalf of the child, when the father one day passed away, yes, there's estate duty in South Africa, and a policy wrapper, there's 12% capital gain. Now it will be paid to you, the foreign son. How is that money be taxed in the hands of the foreign son? So tax residency, a lot of children have left, but they've not formally ceased.
immigrated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that for me is step one, to say how is whatever the son and daughter gets one day, obviously the channels, where do they get it from, how do they get it, but also how the children will be taxed on receipt thereof.
Yeah, I think maybe just to bring that into, to consolidate those statements, I think the approach here is not just product driven and outcome driven, you know, from a product perspective. True wealth creation, I believe, is you know, we incorporate all of these elements and build a sophisticated, you know, watertight solution that have considered various, you know, variances in terms of what the outcomes could be.
But imagine, yeah.
Stress test. Yeah.
Imagine you have whatever you said, which is so valuable. Imagine you can say, you know what, we're not going to rush in half an hour for the family. Let's have a morning. Let's everybody around the table and let's throw these things just around. Just sort of, so I call it in very basic English, slice and dice it, sort of like to see sort of like where does what fit and where are the red lights.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so the last question is, from an offshore perspective, it becomes very complex. You spoke about DTAs, etc. Tax liabilities, probate, CETUS in the offshore environment. A lot of our clients that we consult have legacy investment structures, share portfolios, cash accounts, you know, various underlying assets that's you know, just sitting offshore, obviously being taxed in different ways, and not necessarily, the clients aren't necessarily considering all of the tax layers because they're not necessarily familiar with all of those. What sort of red lights have you seen in discussions with clients in that regard?
Sure. I created, I'm happy to share it with you in the audience. We created almost like a checklist. So when people say, I got this offshore investment, sort of top of my head, is there income tax? Is there capital gains tax? Is there probate? Now, for the audience members, probate is depending where the investment is registered in Guernsey. Now, Guernsey equals probate. Now, probate means is before you get taxed in your worldwide assets as per your South African will, Guernsey needs to obtain all the original certified documentation to be able to throw it through the Guernsey courts for Guernsey to say, yes, grant of probate. And if in probate, it's not a tax. Probate can say sort of like, is the original, the person who passed away is a original, sort of like, it's justifiable and original. Who's the beneficiaries? Look at the will, sort of, they must just follow the flow of money, that the flow of money sort of complies as per the Guernsey laws. But interesting now, when you look at certain platforms, 91, what I've learned through research, the platform can override the probate. So if the platform say, you know what, we're comfortable with that the South African executive will deal with that, you can say probate doesn't apply. So that alone, for example, take that pain away from you.
And the time.
Yeah, and because you have no idea how long that will take, because that law firms in Guernsey can throw back and forth, and they only deal with originals. So probate, for example, CETUS tax is if I own shares. The share register is registered in the US, in America, and one or two other countries, but that you need to avoid. But the big problem, because that can go as high as 40%. Now, even between me and my spouse, there's in America a very small rollover from $60,000. And so remember, South Africa is complete rollover between spouses. They're not. If you're a US citizen as well as your wife, it's like, I think between me and my wife is something like $15 million rollover. But if the spouses are not, they live in South Africa, there's only 60,000. And the balance get taxed at 40%. So for me, CETUS tax is a big no-no. But the problem is I need to incur capital gain to deal with that. And a lot of people say, oh my goodness, do I do that? Offshore investments, I try not to work via the will. So I like beneficiary nominations. There the policy is very favorable. But a policy offshore endowment sinking fund, for me, unfortunately, is only beneficial for me being a South African tax resident and my beneficiary being a South African tax resident. If my beneficiary is foreign, almost in my case, 99% foreign child mustn't take over policy. Because in the policy, you get taxed as per South African Long-Term Insurance Act, 30% income tax, 12% capital gain. Foreign child should not pay that. What else is there?
Can I just interrupt you there, Albert? On that point, that changes, right? So we implement, structure the wealth.
You need to keep up.
I get that,
Yeah.
but clients don't necessarily, bring that to our attention. So
Yeah.
we obviously pick that up in these sessions that you refer to, but clients don't necessarily pick that up. So my son then immigrates. He then immigrates financially as well, becomes an offshore resident, and no longer a South African resident, but he or she is still the beneficiary
Of the policy.
for ownership on the
Yeah.
product.
Cannot be.
I
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
do we work around that? Because that now implicates the estate planner, right?
Yeah, I think you need to create a checklist. It's like I live off checklists. So you need to create a checklist when you see your client to say, for example, here's the generic, are you still South African? Are your wife still there? Are your children South Africa or have they left? And then on the other side, just thinking aloud here, are all the investments? To say, okay, fine, now my child have left. Okay, so where does it affect, for example? It's a full-time job. Especially if the family become international.
Yeah, some of these advisors don't even know this.
No, you need to know that.
This is
Yeah,
a
you
trouble.
need to. Interesting. We 91 now. We do now. I've just retract. We say the foreign child is the beneficiary of a policy. I've just said now, in our view, a foreign child should not become the owner of the policy. The foreign child say, "Thank you, 91. I want the cash." But now, interesting. When the policy pays out the cash to the foreign child, is there any tax consequences in the hand of the foreign child? So we need to go a step further now. We already said the foreign child cannot become the owner. The foreign child say, I want the cash. But now, how is that tax in the hands? Because remember, there's a difference, Luciano, between when my father died, I inherit money via his will. In my view, touchwood, don't take it from where it comes, is 99.9, that inheritance is capital in the hands of me, the son. But if I'm a beneficiary of something, that does not mean I'm a beneficiary of the will. Because remember, a beneficiary of the policy, you don't need a will. Now, when that money pays out to me, because I know as a foreign child now, can't become the owner, I'm taking the cash. We need to go a step further now, and we've done that now. We started to send sort of briefs out to certain countries, law firms in the country. We've just done now one in the UK, to say UK tax experts, when a 91 global policy pays out to Luciano, being a UK tax resident son, is there any tax consequence in your way? So we go a step further now. So it's not only the beneficiary take ownership, beneficiary also say, or foreign beneficiary, give me the cash. And because of some of this vagueness, you'll find now the father would have said, father has maybe 3 children. Father would say, you know what, I'm going to do the policy offshore for my 2 South African children. But I might be doing another product for my foreign child. Because there, the foreign child would inherit via my South African will. Yes, it's cumbersome, lengthy, etc. But the foreign child can keep that investment because that investment is a foreign registered nominee and not something else. So you're starting to, back to my other point earlier, you're starting to see that the parent, in our view, the parent is starting to invest as per what is going to be the best one day for the beneficiary, being South African son or a foreign son to inherit.
Yes, I guess it's starting with that end in mind. So understanding how do you want to transfer intergenerational wealth,
and what they're going to do with it, and what they want to do with it.
Practical, in that regard as well. So I think that's where the mismatch obviously often happens. And as I said, we often come across clients that have been serviced by different firms for a number of years, but unfortunately,
you need to look at all these things.
These elements aren't necessarily always, understood and advised on. So thank you for highlighting that once again.
Other thing which we touch on, which maybe not to touch, is trusts, foreign trusts, topical. So do I take money out of the country and donate it to a foreign trust? Do I take money out of the country and lend it to the foreign trust, and potentially there's 7C loan account interest implications? Or do I invest in something and when I passed away, the trust inherit from me and it rolls in? Now, there suddenly the investment can roll into the trust, and depending on the structure you use, there doesn't have to be capital gains tax, there doesn't have to be a will, there doesn't have to be a master, doesn't have to be executor's fees, so there's potentiality there. I find very topical, Luciano, at the moment, South African trusts can now distribute to foreign trusts, which is hugely topical because that distribution is a capital distribution. There's no loan account. So large families, large South African trusts, or potentially South African trusts that are going to receive funds somehow in the near future, they need to know about it, because step one, a South African trust can only do it if the beneficiary nomination allows for that in the South African trust. So the world has become one. In the old days, there's certain entities that you could never do certain things with. But now you find you sort of see it's starting to flow, which in our world is absolutely fantastic. But there's still certain things South African companies cannot physically take the money out of the. They can do it in the production of work and income, but cannot take physically money out of the country for passive investment. Now, how do you structure that? And also the other thing which they haven't relaxed on is when a miner inherits money offshore. The miner can inherit the money, but they must get the Reserve Bank approval to keep the money offshore. Same with South African Trust. So South African Trust can take the money and do a distribution to an offshore trust, but South African Trust cannot inherit an offshore investment without Reserve Bank approval to say, yes, South African Trust, you can keep the money offshore. So a lot of relaxations, but there's a couple of things still where which you can't do. And clients need to know that, because very often I see minor children are beneficiaries on offshore investments, not knowing the potential that money must come back to South Africa.
Albert, thank you very much for your input.
You're welcome, Luciano.
It's always food for thought, and I think the purpose of these sessions is exactly that. We want to encourage clients to engage with us, to not just discuss asset management and solutions and wealth creation, but more realistically approach your intergenerational family wealth creation plan, where we interrogate all these complexities, not just from a local perspective, but also from an offshore perspective, so that we could ensure a seamless wealth creation plan. Thank you for
You're welcome. Hope that helped a bit.
Your precious time, Albert. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure the audience would really appreciate this as well.
You're welcome.
So have a fantastic trip up in Gauteng. I hope weather treats you well.
Thank you.
And travel safe back to Cape Town later.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Albert.